Hey everybody, Aaron Cowan, Sage Dynamics. In this video, continuing our series talking about the fundamentals of marksmanship, we're going to be talking about recoil control. If you're just jumping into the series, which if you're a subscriber, it's likely, I guess, but probably you've been watching the same videos, or the series throughout. But we've been going through the fundamentals of marksmanship as applied to self-defense, my personal philosophy, my approach to them, which ones I feel are on that list. There's a few different variations of the fundamentals of marksmanship you'll see out there. I like to apply the fundamentals to self-defense because I'm a self-defense focused instructor. I don't like two separate rules to exist, range versus real world, because in self-defense you practice on the range for what may happen in the real world as accurately and realistically as you can, hopefully. So we've already covered grip, stance, sight picture, sight alignment, breathing, trigger control, and now we're on recoil management, which for some people you might be like, I've never seen that on a fundamentals of marksmanship video. Or you might say, well, isn't that part of grip and stance? No. Recoil control is the ability to get your sights back. It's the ability to manage the energy that's going to be created by the bullet being fired, or bullets being fired, to get your sights back to be able to make another knowledgeable shot. Now, grip is part of that. If you have a weak grip, your recoil control is going to be, well, bad. If your stance is compromised, it may affect your recoil control as well. If I'm too far bladed with a rifle, I may be pushing the shoulder back with the energy versus taking the energy and distributing it as evenly as possible throughout my body. So there are factors in grip and stance that do apply to recoil management, recoil control. But I do consider it to be its own fundamental because some people don't understand, or they don't have an efficient understanding of what the recoil is telling them as it's occurring. The human body is not fast enough reflex-wise to manage recoil as it occurs. So as the gun rises, we can't go right about here and say, oh, more pressure and press down. You set yourself up for the pressure. The gun goes off, you get your sights back. So you set yourself up for it and you do it. It's like jumping over a puddle. It's really hard to change things in the middle. You know, once you're in the air, you've kind of committed to the act, and recoil control is pretty much like that. Now, if I'm shooting rapidly, I can make those small changes based on what I'm seeing, what kind of feedback I'm getting, how the target is behaving. A number of other environmental factors may change the way I do things based on kind of results I'm getting. The faster I'm shooting, the faster I can make those corrections, dependent on the target being still, like it would be a piece of paper, versus, you know, a use of force situation where it's a live human being and he's moving around a whole lot. In those situations, you might not be able to do a 10-round string responsibly. I don't know of too many people who'd be, you know, ballsy enough to stand still and let you punch 10 rounds into them without some kind of physical reaction to it. And of course, there's exceptions to all rules. That person exists, and if you ever get attacked and have to use self-defense, I hope that's the guy you get. But it's not as likely as someone who's going to react to gunfire in the way that most of us would in a situation where we're like, I came here without bullet holes in me, I kind of want to leave that way. So when we're isolating recoil management, I'm not teaching people to be able to punch 15 rounds into a guy, although if they have to, they have to. I'm not saying this is what you will be able to do. I'm saying you can't develop a good technique of recoil management unless you shoot high rates of fire and you get the gun running and close to cyclic as possible. You say, well, if recoil management is going to be a natural occurrence, why have it as its own fundamental of marksmanship? Because I see people with poor recoil management. And I don't mean like everybody. I mean that some people come to classes and they have some efficiency issues with their ability to manage their recoil because they haven't been taught how to read their sight picture, their sight alignment, or their dot behavior based on what the gun's doing. And I've covered this specifically in videos, especially for the RMR or red dot MRDS for handguns, about how to listen to what the dot's telling you. Some people can watch it and like smugly be like, well, so you're saying if the dot's going up and down, then I'm doing a good job. Well, duh, I knew that. And I'm like, oh, did you though? Did you really? Did you know? Are you able to predict dots placement and dots falling into the picture? You see things at the speed of light. You don't process them that fast. So if I'm punched out on my target and I'm shooting from my A zone, and I'm watching my dot or my front sight come back down during recoil, and let's be honest, if it's on a reciprocating slide, you're probably not watching it come back down. You're moving the gun back down to its reset position based on your proprioception and your understanding of where you were aiming to begin with. The gun's going to roughly return to that same position unless something changes. What you're doing is you're waiting for the sights to reappear in front of your eye. With a red dot, you can see it move because you're target focused and it's a red dot, but you're not actually tracking it up, tracking it down. Within reason, not accurately, not consciously. You just see it in your field of vision. When you shoot, are you shooting as it crosses into your desired point of impact or once it gets there? And this is something I teach, especially in red dot classes. Guys find almost across the board, and I've got a pretty large sample size for this, that they can actually shoot faster and maintain the same degree of hits than they thought they could, even at increased distances. So I've got guys shooting near cyclic at 7 and 10 yards, getting really tight groups, or at least staying in the A zone, which is a very small, 3.5 by 4, or depending on the target, 4 by 6 inch box, which is close to the size of the human heart, placed high in the thoracic cavity. Same with the head, they can get the same hits. The trick and the technique is to realize that once you recognize dot placement, the placement has already occurred, because it takes time for that signal to come back down to your little finger, 200, 300, 400 milliseconds, but time is time. So if I know the gun is going to reset and nothing else has changed, I'm going to tell you, as soon as that dot or that front sight comes into an acceptable hit area, the A zone or the B zone, depending on how accurate you're trying to be, go ahead and pull the shot. Because by the time that signal takes place and it goes down to your little trigger finger there, the sights are where you wanted them to be, because that's where they were going. You'll see some instructors do a demonstration where they'll press out on a target, they'll fire one round, they'll look away, and they'll fire another 10, 15 rounds. And it's a pretty good group. And that's because of that proprioception and that positioning that we have. Our body's going to understand, like, these are where my arms need to be in relation to elevation of where I place them and, alignment. So if that can occur without any visual input, again, if the target moves, then you wouldn't be able to do that. Well, the same applies to recoil management. If I'm going cyclic and my target moves, I've got to come off the trigger to responsibly track them. That's part of recoil. Once recoil dissipates, it no longer becomes a problem. So if I'm just shooting bang, 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 recoil management's not really a factor. That's all stability, because all the energy has gone out of the gun by the next time you touch that trigger to fire another round. If I'm shooting the gun fast based on distance, circumstance, conditions, accuracy, whatever, recoil, that energy is going to be constant. It's going to be near cyclic. So it's going to be energy, 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 energy. And I have to be able to manage that energy based on what my sight picture or my dot placement is telling me. And that's why I consider recoil management to be a fundamental. Yes, it does factor into sight picture, sight alignment. You can argue that you could have just covered this in that video, but there's an appreciation for recoil and what it's going to do. What I'm looking for is not necessarily the management of the gun as it comes up, but the predictive management of the gun as it comes down. And I also want to make sure I don't go what I call, well, I didn't come up with a term, but what I use the term negative recoil. Negative recoil is something you may have seen on slow-mo video and didn't even realize it. Someone's shooting and the gun recoils, and as they come back down, they actually go below and then come back up and then fire the second shot. Up, below, back up, third shot. The gun is being driven below its desired point of impact. They're having to raise it back up, consciously, unconsciously, subconsciously, however you want to say it. Sometimes it is conscious based on distance. I know I've seen that shooting at very small targets at 25 where I'll shoot and then my gun will settle below where I want to hit and I have to make another correction. At closer distances, you may not even notice it, but it is a factor. And what that means is your efficiency of pressure, especially downward pressure on the gun, isn't quite where it could be. At 3 yards, you're not going to notice a difference in shot placement with a little bit of negative recoil. 5, 10, 15 yards, that's when you start to notice, okay, I'm stringing vertically. My hits are starting high, going low, or starting low, going high, based on however I'm resetting the gun. That's a better problem to have than horizontal deviation. If you're shooting left or shooting right, that's usually a grip issue. If you're stringing vertically, that's usually a recoil management and a prediction issue based on, are you consistently breaking the shot based on the information and sending the signal back down to the trigger finger as that dot or the front sight post comes back down to get the hit that you want. If you have a very, especially when you shoot fast at closer distances, if your vertical stringing is very high, like you're all up and down the A zone or maybe a little low, a little high outside of the A zone, that's one of two factors. One of them is understanding of when to break the shot based on when the sight comes back down to the desired point of impact, specifically where you break the shot. Because remember, if you break it when you see the sights and you send the signal, the gun may have already traveled a little bit below that, and you're breaking the shot before the gun comes back up. And that's getting into that very almost infinitesimal amount of time that it takes for the signal to be transmitted from your brain to your finger once you visually process what you're seeing, the information. And of course, it could be a factor of applying too much downward pressure on the gun. Which is a very real possibility. Yes, you can't press downward hard enough on a handgun with any handgun grip that I'm aware of to keep the gun from rising as it shoots a little bit. But you can apply so much pressure that as the recoil dissipates, you drive through your grip and then you shoot low. And that's definitely a problem that we have to factor. So on handguns and rifles, I see shooters do it on rifles too. Of course, on rifles, it can also be the muzzle device you use. Some muzzle devices actually are so efficient that they push the gun in a negative recoil below the desired point of impact, and the shooter has to raise it back up every single time. Some are worse than others. That's a factor for rifles. Recoil management, again, is also a factor in physical positioning, both on handguns and rifles, but more on rifles. You see if someone's physical positioning is not helping them in managing that recoil. And that goes back to stance. The recoil will help you fix your stance. So there is that a little bit of a, in a wide degree, a very symbiotic relationship between all the fundamentals to make sure that they work in harmony, if you will, concert. They want to work together. And one fundamental can help you identify problems with another fundamental. So if I have poor recoil management, it may be because of my stance. That could be part of it. Standing, shooting a rifle, if I'm bladed, or if I have my feet really close together, or if I'm leaning back just a little bit, I'm not getting into the gun, or I don't have a solid enough cheek weld and shoulder support, that can cause the rifle to push me back. Body size in relation to caliber, 12 gauge versus 110 pounds, there's going to be more movement there versus 12 gauge versus 200 pounds. So that's also a factor. Physical size is a factor. Something you see with people who are new to select fire is they'll get on the gun, and halfway through the magazine, the gun walks up and they start to go with it. The human body can't shoot that fast without mechanical help. So, you got a rifle that shoots 800 rounds a minute. With a handgun, I have a converted Agency 17. It has a auto sear on it, 1,200 rounds a minute, which is a .025 split. Most shooters are in the .19, .15, .12 range when it comes to split times between rounds. That gun's 1,200 rounds a minute, so that's a considerably faster rate of fire than most human beings, or let's be honest, any human being is capable of without a mechanical device such as an auto sear. When I let someone shoot that gun for the first time, you see that recoil management wasn't an issue until they had a full auto handgun in their hands, and then the actual pistol itself will start to push them back because they're not prepared for that pressure, that torque, that consistent rate of cyclic recoil. That's a good functional example to somebody of how recoil management can work under the right conditions, but if you change enough of the conditions, or you change the amount of energy that's being delivered, that same technique wouldn't be as effective. Now, I'm not saying everybody run out and get their SOT and buy an auto sear so they can work on their recoil management technique for the handgun. Just using that as kind of an illustrative example of how the pressure you're applying is the pressure for how fast you can shoot at your skill level. If you don't use select fire, you don't own select fire, you don't occupationally have to use select fire, then this is probably something you're never going to have to worry about because you only have to manage the speed at which you shoot. But if I change the conditions, you see if your technique works across the board, and what you find is it doesn't. The same technique that I have to use for a 1,200 rounds per minute handgun is going to be different from the technique I'm forced to use for my normal split times on a similar handgun. I don't have to worry about as much energy being delivered as fast. So when it comes to recoil control, yes, I consider it to be a fundamental marksmanship because it requires a more isolated approach in understanding the relationship between some of the other fundamentals we've already covered. Grip is a factor, stance is a factor, sight picture sight alignment is a factor. Obviously, without good trigger control, you can't get that recoil. You're not going to have, I should say, as much recoil as you will if your trigger control only allows you to shoot like a .15 or 2.5-3.5 split. Do I have to shoot fast? No. Yes. Maybe. I can't answer that question. I would say that you should be able to shoot as fast as possible because you don't know the conditions in which you're going to need your firearm. It's more likely to shoot a threat closer than it is necessarily further away. I'd say it's more likely to have a threat at 5 to 3 yards versus 25 to 55 yards, but those statistics are of cold comfort to a guy who has to shoot a guy across the parking lot because that's how the situation developed. And of course, you can come up in your mind any scenario in which that wouldn't be a reasonable use of force for a citizen. And I could also fire right back a really good example of where it would. And then we get into the argument of which one of us is more in fantasy land. I can't predict the nature of bad guy behavior. If I could, I probably wouldn't need a firearm at all because I'd be living on my own island because I could predict the future and I bought all the lottery tickets every week for the end of time and I had more money than anybody. And then I wouldn't have to worry about these things. But because I can't predict the future, I actually kind of suck at it, and most of us do. I don't have that luxury to make declarative assumptions based on someone's skill level, based on what they're practicing. So while I think it's very important to have close-up shooting skills because that's where the shooting is most likely going to occur, you still need to have those back of the range skills as well because that's on the menu. It may be a little bit further down, just a little bit, maybe a percentage here or there, but it's still there. It's definitely a factor. So recoil management going to be a bigger deal up close than it is further back, but it's still something that you have to factor into your practice and learn that the faster you're able to shoot the gun, faster you can, the more possible faster you can shoot, the better you're actually going to improve your efficiency on some of those other techniques, such as your grip, such as your sight pitch, or such as your sight alignment, and of course your stance. I'm Eric Allen with Sage Dynamics. Train accordingly.